My name is Caleb, and welcome to Build. Today, we're building a side-by-side. All right, so this is a side-by-side my mother-in-law bought for the boys. We rode it maybe 4 times before the engines or the motors stopped working. It is electric, like a Power Wheels ride-on type thing. So this thing has not worked since it broke like a year ago, and I've always wanted to do something with it, so I figured it's time to put a gasoline motor in it. So that's what we're gonna do, but first we gotta break it down because to put a gasoline motor in it, we gotta do a bunch of supporting mods like build a metal chassis, fix our steering, replace everything. So we're gonna basically build a custom tube side-by-side for kids out of this old, busted, broken side-by-side. Before any of that, we have to strip this thing down and get all the plastic parts off of it, get all the electric stuff off of it, so that we can start building our chassis. Let's do it. All right, so we've got to build a chassis for this. Before we can, we've got to get a lot of the not needed plastic out of the way. So if you go underneath here, you'll see there's a lot of stuff that's just there as filler, basically. These fake springs, this whole box, none of it's necessary, and we definitely don't want it getting in the way of all of our steering and suspension components. So we're just going to come up with a grinder or cut-off wheel and just cut this out, basically right there, and then we've got to cut out a section in the back for our engine to go, because we're actually moving the engine to the back, just like a real side-by-side. Once we get all that cut away, then we'll have a good idea of how to actually build the chassis so it fits this body really well and gives us all the mounting points we need for all of our new stuff. Ta-da! All right, so we've got everything cleared out now, and I'm starting to kind of figure out how we're going to build this. I was a little bit confused before we cleared all this plastic out, but now we have some space. So the first thing we're gonna do is just build our main chassis. And we're just gonna use our tubing bender to kind of match the shape of this so we can build a tube chassis that matches this body perfectly. It'll all mount up like it's supposed to. I think it's gonna be really easy. We'll build our front suspension box kind of up here. That'll handle all of our steering and suspension. And then we'll build like a rear swing arm for the rear to hold the engine and everything. But I think I'm gonna work front first and then go and do the rear second. All right, let's bend some tubes. There. All right, let it go. I'm gonna line it up first. Hey, what are y'all doing? So it is finally time to use literally my favorite tool that I own and the tool that's making this whole build possible. This is my Rogue Fab Bender. There's a lot of tubing benders on the market, and they all generally do the same thing in that you want to bend tubing without sacrificing its structural integrity, and that's what this does. The difference in the Rogue Fab, and the reason I really like it, is because of space. It bends the tube upward instead of out, so you don't need a massive footprint to be able to bend. I'm not gonna go into a full DIY on how to use this bender. There's way better DIYs on Rogue Fab's YouTube channel, so check those out if you're interested in how this thing works. So this is the engine for our side-by-side. My son is 5. I don't want to put a 212 in there just yet. So we're going to start out on a 79cc. And before we do anything else, I just want to hear this thing run. So we're going to fill it up with some Haviland full synthetic 10W30, which is it's like a third of a quart. So we're actually not going to pour it out of that. We're going to put it into this cut up water bottle first. We'll pour that in, and then we'll fill it up with some fuel. This is gas and not water, right? I smelled it. I'm just kidding. I smelled it. Perfect. We got our steering mounted where it's going to be, or it's kind of floating. We've got this bar that I put in that's going to act as kind of suspension mounting points as well, and all of that's going to get done, but I'm having to wait on some parts that we'll show you later on. So for now, we're going to put this on hold and move to the rear. That's why we bought the engine. In the rear, we've got to build sort of a swing arm / engine mount kind of space, something for our engine to live on, something for our rear axle to live on as well. So we're going to start by just building our rear swing arm, and we'll kind of build off of that downward, but really upward, so that we can have a place to put our engine, our axle, our brakes, everything else is going to make this thing actually work. Very, very excited. Let's do it. All right, so what we're going to do first, before we get into actually building our rear swing arm, is build out the axle. I got this as a kit. Everything for this side-by-side I've bought from Amazon, aside from the Rogue Fab Bender. So it's all there. I'll link everything below. If you want to do this, that's all that you're going to need. But this is a kit, and it comes with basically everything, or really everything that we need for the rear axle. We've got a brake, we've got our sprocket. So we're just gonna assemble all this out so that I know kind of my widths, where everything needs to be. And then that will give us an idea of what we need to do as far as building the sway arm to house our rear axle. All right, so when I have to do 2 bends on this machine, this thing really needs to be level. And there's a lot of ways to handle this problem, but the way I like to is I just have 2 blocks. So we've got this thing mounted up front in one block, and then we have another block back here. And I take this digital level and just read level. It should be like 2 degrees. Let's see. Yep. So we weren't actually at 90 degrees, and that was the issue. We pulled it in 2 degrees on both sides, and now we have we have space between the tires, and this is gonna work out just well. We've got to build a mount to mount this onto the frame that will swivel so it can go up and down. So the next major part is building kind of the over portion, the cage that the engine itself is gonna rest on.
I needed a place to mount the engine, so I bent these tubes up and notched them, and then just placed them the width of the mounting plate for the engine. It comes with the engine when you buy it from Harbor Freight. Next, I drilled a 1.5 inch hole into a bump stop that I had laying around. This created a bushing that I can use to attach the swing arm to the frame. I cut up some 1.5 inch tubing to house the bushing, and then drove a steel sleeve through that just because that's the way factory bushings look, so I imagine it must be important. Putting these engines on can be a huge pain if the nut or the bolt isn't captive, so I welded the bolts into the tubing. That way I can just sit the engine on, tighten the nuts down, and we're good to go. After that, I installed my torque converter. That's going to allow us to figure out where this thing actually needs to go. I did it wrong 3 times and then did it right, and I think it's going to work. With that done, we needed to place the axle, and this was actually a little bit harder than I thought because the clearance was really tight, and I planned that. But once we got it all sorted out, it worked. It fit just barely. I placed it up into the frame just to see what our clearance was like, and it's really tight. We're gonna have to make some adjustments there, but overall, I'm very happy with this design.
Alright, and we're gonna call this video done here. It's hard to stop because I've got so much more I want to do, but we've got kind of a really good break right now where we've got the swing arm built, we've got some control arm design kind of figured out a little bit, but we haven't done any suspension yet. So in the next video, we'll be doing our suspension and steering and getting everything kind of connected so that the vehicle, the side-by-side, can sit on its own. So we may end up having to get a wider axle for the rear just to push it out to the same width as the front, or I can pull the front in. I do like the wider stance just because wide body everything, but also just for stability with my kids driving this thing, I definitely want it to be as stable as possible. And I know that having that wide stance will stabilize it a lot. Overall though, very excited about how this thing has come out. The steering I think is gonna work out perfectly. The frame came together really well. I'm getting better at notching, I'm getting better at welding, so that's really exciting for like roll cages and stuff that are coming up. If you're wanting to build a go-kart like this, and you're wondering parts and everything, I'm gonna leave a link in every single video of this go-kart of all the parts I used. I bought a lot of kits and a lot of like pre-built stuff off of Amazon. It's all on there, so I'll leave a link below if you're interested in trying to tackle a project like this at home. You don't have to go as crazy as we're going, but it is fun to do so. As far as making metal things like this, the 2 tools that you need are a welder and the Rogue Fab Bender. Huge shout out to Rogue Fab. We've been working with them for a really long time. We love what those guys do. We love the service that they offer with their benders and their stands and their dies and everything else that they make over there. So if you are interested in learning how to bend stuff up, that machine's easy. It's the first one I've ever owned. It was very easy to use, very easy to learn, and you can make really sick stuff in not that much time. I mean, this has gone together really quick. This is my very first time ever building something like this from scratch. So as nerve-wracking as it is, it's also super exciting. Make sure you check back next week to see this thing hopefully sitting on the ground on its own, maybe even running on its own power. I mean, our drivetrain's set up. I don't see why that should happen. I think that could happen. We'll see you in the next one.